Howdy, my totally tubular gamers. We're back with another video. Let's get to it.
Well, the year is almost up, but we're still talking about the best games of 2024, and today we're going to be talking about the best RPGs of the year. 2024 was a killer year when it came to RPGs. There were so many good titles here. If you're somebody who likes role-playing games, man, you were eating good. Really, from that first month all the way up until December, it was just good RPG after good RPG. It's pretty ridiculous how many high quality RPGs released this year. And so today we're going to be talking about the best of the best. This list is in no particular order. It's just my 10 favorite RPGs that I played in 2024. As always, I did not play every single game that released this year. I tried. I really tried my hardest to play as many games as I could this year, but I was unfortunately not able to play every single game. So let me know down below of any games I might be missing. So with that, please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Seriously, thank you all so very much, especially my patrons. I really do love you all. Thank you. So let's get to the RPGs. So kicking things off, we have one of the very best games of 2024, Metaphor ReFantazio. And all I really got to say about this one is that it's a wonderful video game. It's not only one of the best RPGs of 2024, it's one of the best RPGs to come out in the last few years. Like, this is just a stellar video game. It was developed by the team that made Persona 5, and it really is like just as good as Persona 5. While there are obviously plenty of similarities between Metaphor and Persona, there's a ton of differences, and it really does stand on its own. An area where this is very prevalent is when it comes to the story, characters, and world of Metaphor. It is very, very different from Persona, and man, this is just one of the most unique worlds I've ever seen in any video game. It is very fantasy inspired, and it deals with some really heavy topics, but oh, it is so good in this game. All of the characters are fantastic, the writing is great, the plot twists are crazy, the story is just incredible. The story is one of the very best stories in any video game in 2024. The story alone makes it one of the best games of 2024, and the more you play of it, the better it gets. But when it comes to the gameplay, oh, it is no slouch. This is an excellent RPG. It's kind of a mix of action and turn-based. When you're running around in these dungeons or areas with enemies, you can actually attack them in real time to get the jump on them, and then of course it goes to the turn-based battles. But the turn-based battles, ooh, it is so good. Kind of like Persona, there's a ton of depth and strategies when it comes to these battles. You can build out all of your characters. There's a ton of different jobs for these characters, and it just felt like there were so many different ways to play this game. The combat, it really comes together. It feels enhanced and improved on what SMT 5 and Persona 5 have, and I thought those games had fantastic battle systems. The combat was really great in those games, but here it might be even better. Seriously, the combat, really great stuff. The game has some excellent dungeons to it as well. All of the dungeons are handcrafted and very well designed. And when you're not in one of the dungeons, you're in the overworld where you get to interact with characters, spend time with them, which is very similar to Persona. And this gameplay loop, it really just comes together. It comes together sometimes even more so than any of the other Persona games. I'll stop comparing it to Persona and just say, it's a delightful game. The presentation is also to die for. Like, they're just flexing at this point. This game just looks so good. The characters look great. The animation's incredible. The art style, oh, it's so good. And the menus, man, the menus are crazy good looking in this game. The soundtrack is just something I didn't expect. At first I was like, oh, what is this? This music is weird, it's different. But as I played more and more, man, this soundtrack really grew on me. Metaphor is one of the best games of 2024 for a reason. If you're somebody that likes RPGs, go out of your way, play Metaphor. You will not be disappointed. This is such a good game. So the next game we have here is Dragon's Dogma 2. While I know a number of people were a bit disappointed with this one, I still thought it was a pretty good game. I will say though, this game is very, and I mean very similar to the first Dragon's Dogma. It sees you playing as the Arisen, who's going to take on the dragon and save all the people, but of course it's not going to go exactly like that. When it comes to the story, while it does start intriguing enough, unfortunately it just kind of fizzled out for me personally, and I couldn't really care less what happened by the end of it. At least the gameplay is actually pretty good. This is a massive open world RPG with plenty of things to see. There's lots of quests to be given out, and of course you'll get into combat with a lot of different creatures. The best part of Dragon's Dogma 2 is easily the combat. The combat is actually really good in this game. There's tons of different playstyles and classes, and they all feel really different from each other. But something they all have in common is that they all feel really good. Like, the combat feels meaty and crunchy, and it just feels incredibly satisfying at times. You can even climb larger enemies like it's Shadow of the Colossus. You can also really interact with your environment. The combat is some of the best action RPG combat of 2024. Everything about it was just very well done. When it comes to the open world itself, I also thought it was pretty good. It feels incredibly alive, like it isn't just revolving around the player. You actually feel immersed into this world, and I really had a good time exploring it. You get lots of quests in this game as well, and while it isn't super obvious what you're supposed to do for every single quest, and at times it can feel a little cryptic, I actually liked a majority of the quests here. There were some really good ones. The side quests, yeah, I was a bit more iffy on, but for the main storyline, yeah, I liked it. I also like summoning the pawns. I've always thought this is a really cool aspect to the game. It was probably the coolest part of Dragon's Dogma 1, and yeah, it's here in full force. Speaking of Dragon's Dogma 1, I will say this game is very similar to the first one. Like, if you did not like the first one, you're not going to like this game. If you were expecting a ton of major improvements on the original game, you might be a bit disappointed here. But I would rather play Dragon's Dogma 2 over the first one. I think the gameplay loops are a little stronger, the combat's better, and I had more fun questing and exploring the open world. I also think the game looks pretty good and there's a good attention to detail. I just wish the frame rate wasn't all over the place. All in all, I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is a pretty good game, and while it's not one of the very best RPGs of the year, I still thought it was pretty good. So the next game we have here is the Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door remake. I still can't believe this thing is real. We wanted it for ages and Nintendo actually gave it to us, and it's glorious. This is a very faithful recreation of that GameCube classic, and it's just as good as I remember it. Yes, it is at 30 FPS versus the original 60, but I very quickly got used to it and didn't have an issue with it. And the game looks fantastic now. Like, I just love how all the colors pop. The paper looks really great. The game really looks better than ever. The soundtrack's also been redone, and I think the soundtrack is really great as well. When it comes to the story and the gameplay, it pretty much is untouched from the original game. Seeing Mario go on this big, epic, long journey to open the Thousand-Year Door. The story is nothing short of fantastic. This might be the best story of any Mario game ever. There's so many unique settings and characters, there's a ton of great moments to this game, and it's just so weird. It's easily the weirdest Mario game of them all, but man, I love it. The dialogue's really great, the game has an excellent sense of humor, and I think it's just an unforgettable story. And when it comes to the gameplay, it's the Paper Mario gameplay you know and love, where half of it is exploring around the environment, doing some platforming and basic puzzle solving, while the other half is the turn-based battles, and the turn-based battles are the best the series has ever been. I think I can speak for most Paper Mario fans and say that Paper Mario's turn-based battles really peaked here at the Thousand-Year Door, and it being remade, it really just reinforces that. Shoot, it might even be peak turn-based combat for any Mario game. Like, it's really great stuff. There's tons of different partners to choose from. You have so many items and badges and abilities and moves, and we could go on and on and on about how great this battle system is and how many amazing boss fights and enemies there are, but to quickly summarize though, it's wonderful. The combat is excellent, and it's incredible just how well Paper Mario The Thousand-Year Door has aged. It was great like 20 years ago, and it's still great even nowadays. If you still haven't played this game and you like Mario and RPGs, I really don't know what you're waiting for. It's widely available on a modern platform, and the game really has aged marvelously. So the next game we have here is an RPG that just hasn't gotten enough attention, and that is Visions of Mana. This one came out in late August, and I feel like it's been one of the most underrated titles of the entire year. The game really feels like a love letter to JRPGs from the late 90s. It's the first brand new Mana game in such a long time, and it's actually pretty good. Sure, it does have some issues, but for the most part, I really did enjoy this one. The story is your typical Mana story where it's all about the Tree of Life and some chosen ones, and that's all I'm really going to say for the story. Well, at first I found it rather intriguing. Unfortunately, it's one of those stories that just kind of fizzles out, and by the end of it I felt rather indifferent, but there were some rather likable characters here at least. I will say though, I really love how this game looks. Like, graphically, it just looks incredible, the environments look great, the cell shading is really on point, and the animation is really solid also. I think it's just a wonderful looking game, and the music isn't half bad either. When it comes to the actual gameplay, yeah, it totally feels like a Mana game where it's an action RPG, and while the combat isn't anything crazy, and it doesn't have depth the size of an ocean, I still found the combat rather enjoyable. And there's a bunch of jobs that you can switch between with these characters. They all have different abilities, costumes, strengths, weaknesses, etc. And I found it pretty fun to actually switch between all the jobs and characters, and they all do play relatively different. When it comes to the open world, there's actually no open world, it's open zones. Again, akin to older JRPGs, and I had fun exploring these open zones. There's plenty of secrets and treasure all over the place. There's actually a decent amount of side content in this game, but unfortunately I just didn't find it all that engaging or fun. But that's okay, because the main story takes a solid 30 to 40 hours to finish anyway, and I think the pacing is pretty good throughout. I know that Mana is not the biggest JRPG series, but I wish this game got more attention than it did. I actually quite enjoyed it, and I think fans of action RPGs will enjoy this one as well. So from one Square JRPG to the next, here we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. What is there left to say about this game? People have been hyping this game up from the moment it came out in February, and for very good reason. It's arguably the longest game that came out in 2024, and it's one of the very best JRPGs of the year. It's one of the best JRPGs of the entire console generation. It continues the story on from the Final Fantasy VII Remake and sees Cloud and friends traveling across the entire world. While the story is technically a recreation of the original games, there is so much extra stuff here that it's hard to even call it a retelling of Final Fantasy VII at this point. I think the story is fantastic though. The storytelling is really great, all of the characters are excellent, and they're all just insanely likable. There's really not a bad character here, even annoying ass Chadley's alright. And when it comes to the gameplay, yeah, it really does enhance and improve on the gameplay from the Final Fantasy VII Remake. The combat is excellent in this game. It's a nice mix of action RPG combat, but they still have the menus and some turn-based elements with the ATB bar. And while it might seem like a lot of systems at first, when it comes together, oh, it really comes together in this game. All of the characters play insanely different from each other, but what's amazing is just how much fun every single character is to play in this game. I love playing as all of these characters. There's really not a bad one here, and I think it's very impressive just how well this game plays in general. When you are in combat though, you're exploring one of the game's many large open worlds. This is just a massive game with tons upon tons of things to see. There's tons of mini games, events, collectibles, side quests, you name it. This game is just packed to the brim with content. Like, it will take you well over 100 hours if you want to see everything in this game, and for the most part it really is worth it. I think it's all engaging, it's fun, it adds to the story and the world, and I really did enjoy a lot of the side content. Yeah, some of it seems a little unnecessary. There's a lot of mini games here, and the game is no problem wasting your time, but I really enjoyed taking my time with this one. On top of that, the presentation is excellent. This is a great looking game. The characters look great. The environments are stunning. Like, it's all excellent stuff here. Even on a base PS5, the soundtrack is also just delightful. This game's got a lot of good things about it. While I know not everybody is a massive fan of this one, I think it is one of the best games of 2024. Well, keep the action RPGs rolling. Here we have Black Myth Wukong. While I'm sure there are plenty of people who wouldn't say Black Myth Wukong is an action RPG, I absolutely think it is. Sure, it doesn't lean as hard on the RPG side as, say, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth or Visions of Mana, but there are still plenty of RPG elements in this game, like gear, leveling up, getting stronger, etc, etc. It just also happens to be a character action game as well. And a great character action game, I might add on top of that. The combat is really swell in Black Myth Wukong. There's tons of combos and attacks, there's a few different stances you can switch between, and there's a lot of enemies to fight in this game. This game has a ton of boss fights. I did not expect this game to have as many boss fights as it does, and there's some really excellent ones. There's also plenty of bosses that I think are either mildly annoying or somewhat irritating, but most of the boss fights are pretty excellent in Black Myth Wukong. The story is essentially a retelling of Journey to the West, and while I don't think the story or the storytelling is particularly great, the world is really interesting in this game. It feels very different from any other AAA game I've played, and I thought it was pretty cool. Something else that's pretty cool is this game's presentation. This is an incredible looking game. Like, this game looks nothing short of stunning. I don't even have a supercomputer, and this game just looked great. The environments are just killer, the animation's great, the character models are excellent, the bosses look super cool. Like, the presentation really is top notch in this game. It's a real looker. But the game's actually got a lot of content to boot, taking well over 30 hours. There's a good amount of side content and optional bosses. There's a lot to this game. It was one of the longest games I played in 2024. While I know it's not everybody's type of action RPG, I still liked it and don't have much trouble recommending it. So Paper Mario wasn't the only remake. Here we have Persona 3 Reload, which is a full-blown remake of Persona 3. And I believe that this is the definitive way to play Persona 3 going forward. I know there are plenty of people that still prefer the original game for some reason, but in my opinion, it's not even close. This is just a significant improvement on what the original game had. The story and dialogue are really the only thing that's pretty untouched from the original game because it was really good in the original game, and it's just as good here. There's really not a bad character in this game, and when it comes to your core party, oh, they're all so lovable. While the story takes a while to get going, once it gets going, oh, it absolutely gets going, and it actually gets pretty emotional by the end of it. Like, I knew what was coming, and I still teared up. The story, writing, world, characters, all of that, it's all just fantastic. When it comes to the gameplay, yeah, it's a huge improvement on the original game. While the structure of the game is basically identical to the originals, the gameplay actually has been enhanced. For instance, climbing Tartarus is a much more enjoyable experience than the original games. The dungeon crawling's a lot better, the controls are better, the battle system is just significantly improved, it's smoother, faster, you can actually control your party members, and it's just a lot more fun. Some of the more tedious aspects have been removed, like getting tired, and dungeon crawling in general is just a lot better. Tartarus is still repetitive as hell, and it does get old, but it's a lot more bearable than that original game. The daytime gameplay though, yeah, it's basically the same as the originals, where you go to school, you make social links, you build up those social links, you have social stats that you can level up, and it feels more like a life sim. This was great in the original, it's great here. They've added a few things here and there, and some other general quality of life improvements, but this really is just a straight improvement on the original game. I love the presentation, like this is a great looking game, the lighting's awesome, the environments pop, the character models look excellent, the cell shading is off the chain, and the menus, oh my goodness, the menus are so good in this game. Like, they're just as good as Metaphor. Okay, maybe they're not as good as Metaphors, but there's some really great menus here. And that soundtrack is to die for. The soundtrack is so good in this game. We could be here all day talking about the soundtrack. Persona 3 Reload, it's a really great game. It really has everything you could possibly want from a JRPG, and it's one of the best remakes I've ever seen. And if you're one of those people that still prefers the original for some reason, well, you can go play the original. I'm never touching that game again. I'm sticking with Reload. So here we got another game I love yapping about. It is another Crab's Treasure. This game is a Souls-like after all, which is, you know, an action RPG. And I actually think it's one of the best action RPGs of the entire year. Who would have thought that Crab Souls is actually as good as it is? The story starts out rather basic. You play as just this crab who loses his shell and you gotta go get it back, but it quickly evolves into something much, much deeper, and it actually has a really great message and theme to it. And by the end of it, yeah, it was starting to get a little emotional. I know I just said that for Persona 3 Reload, but this game also did it to me as well. But when it actually comes to playing Crab Souls, yeah, it's pretty great stuff here. It plays like most Souls-likes, where it's more slower, methodical combat, and it's all about managing your stamina along with your health, but another Crab's Treasure does a few things to really mix it up from all the other ones. For instance, you have a bunch of shells. You can put just about anything on your back, and everything's got not only its own durability, but its own special ability to use. And I found it really fun to just try to see what every shell would do. Something else this game does to differentiate itself from other Souls-likes is that it actually has a lot of 3D platforming. I know 3D platforming and RPG probably don't go together, but in this case it does. I think the platforming is really great. Level design is excellent, and the game has a good sense of exploration. I liked exploring the big vast open sea. There's a ton of treasure to be found, and you can actually get some really good shit here. When it comes to leveling up your character and other RPG elements, yeah, it is a little on the light side, especially compared to some of these other games, but I think if you're somebody who enjoys Souls-likes, you're gonna like this game. The game is also surprisingly difficult. Unless you turn on a bunch of the accessibility options, this game is going to whoop your ass. Some of the bosses are pretty tough, especially towards the end of the game. To wrap this up, I think this was one of, if not the best Souls-like of 2024, and it's one of the better action RPGs. Okay, so here we have maybe my favorite RPG of the entire year. We have Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth. While some of the older Yakuza games really straddled the line between action RPG and straight beat 'em up from Yakuza 7 and on, which is when the series became Like a Dragon, here in the West it just went fully fledged turn-based RPG. And while I know there are plenty of people that really miss the beat 'em up gameplay, man, I love the turn-based gameplay. And I think this game really is just a straight improvement on Yakuza 7, especially as far as gameplay is concerned. When it comes to the story, it sees Ichiban going to Hawaii for reasons, and that's all I'm actually going to say. The story is wonderful in this game. I think it is excellent. Ichiban really might be like the most likable protagonist of any JRPG, and it's one of those stories that just gets better and better. There's a ton of fan service to the older Yakuza games, and I really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the open world, the combat, the side content, the music, the presentation, the voice acting. Yeah, I kind of just enjoyed like everything about this game. This was one of those games where I just wanted to do everything I possibly could. I tried to do all the side content, I completed all of the sub-stories, I did the annoying ass dungeon with the randomly generated floors, and I loved every second of it. I really enjoy the combat here. While it isn't the most complex and it's not super straightforward like say Dragon Quest, it does a nice balance in between the two, and it's got all the weird wacky shit that the Yakuza games are known for. You can move your characters around in battle now. And I think the combat's really great. I like that you can have jobs for your characters. There's a bunch of new jobs that are all Hawaii themed. The open world is excellent. And I really just found myself fully engrossed in this game. The soundtrack is excellent, the game looks great, and it's one of the best JRPGs of the year. It's one of the best games of the year, and despite the fact that I put over 100 hours into this game, all I wanted to do was play more of it. It really is just that good, man. I love this series to death, and this game, oh, it might be the apex of the entire series. Alright, so the last game I want to talk about today is one you might have forgotten about. It came out earlier in the year. It is Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. While I know there was some hype when this game came out, I feel like I haven't really seen anything about it in many months. In fact, I'm seeing it on games you forgot about that came out in 2024, so here's me talking about it. This is a really solid action RPG that takes place in the Grand Blue Fantasy universe. It doesn't take place at like the beginning of the story or the end. It's more so kind of in the middle. It's just another adventure that these characters happen to go on, and it's very self-contained. I think the story's fine in this game, but I didn't find myself particularly attached to a lot of these characters. But then again, I'm not the most familiar with Grand Blue in general, so maybe that's why. Anyway, when it comes to the gameplay, yeah, this is an action RPG. You get to switch between a bunch of different characters, and it's real-time combat. I think the combat's actually pretty decent in this game. While it doesn't have an astronomical ton of depth here, and it can feel a bit button-mashy at times, it does actually feel nice. The game controls very well. All of the characters feel incredibly different from each other. They all have different abilities, moves, and stats, etc, etc. It's fun to try out all of the different characters and go up against some of the crazy bosses of this game. The bosses feel like low-key MMO bosses where they just have these giant health bars and you're chipping away slowly. Some of these take well over 10 minutes to beat, and yeah, they're pretty engaging for the most part. The combat in general is the best aspect of this game for sure, and it's why I kept going. The structure of this game is a little weird. The pacing too. When you start the game, it seems like a pretty traditional action RPG where you're just moving from level to level, boss to boss, but eventually the game opens up quite a bit and you can actually go on these Monster Hunter style raids, and you can even have other players join you, and this is the end game in its entirety. The main story is only around the 10-hour mark, but there is so much post game in this game, it is ridiculous. You can easily triple your playtime thanks to this post game, and other players can actually join you. While I have finished the main story and I thought it was pretty good, I haven't put a ton of time into the post game, and that's something I would like to do at some point in the future, but there's just so many games that I'm playing right now, it's not even funny. What isn't funny is how good this presentation is. This is a great looking game. I love the anime cel shaded art style, and the game actually was very smooth when it came to the frame rate, animation, and optimization. It ran incredibly well on my computer. This is an underrated action RPG that you shouldn't sleep on because it's not as big and bold as several other games I've talked about today. Even if you're not a fan of Grand Blue Fantasy or know nothing about it, I still think you can enjoy this game. I know next to nothing about it, and I still had fun with the game. It's not the best action RPG I played, and it certainly has its issues, but I still found it a pretty enjoyable experience. I found all of these games to actually be rather enjoyable, and so that's going to be the code word for today, enjoyable. This is the end of the video. If you made it to the end, you can comment enjoyable. You'll get a heart from me. Thank you all so much. I feel exhausted now, so I'm going to go lie down and take a nap or go to sleep for the night. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm rambling at this point. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe, y'all. Bye-bye.